Something was off that night. In a venue built for safety and control, a moment unfolded that no one saw coming. The air was charged, the crowd calm, the schedule precise. Yet, within seconds, everything that was meant to prevent disaster failed in full view of cameras, security teams, and hundreds of witnesses. Tonight, we're revisiting the incident that claimed Charlie Kirk's life, not through speculation, but through a careful look at the inconsistencies that still raise difficult questions. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future investigations like this one. The first area demanding renewed attention is the conduct of both the security and camera crews before and after the shooting. These were professionals, individuals whose role was to ensure control and capture clarity, yet in those decisive seconds, their behavior shifted from calm precision to visible confusion. Video footage from multiple angles shows security members dispersing in an unusual pattern just moments before the sound that ended the event. Some moved away from their assigned posts, while others appeared uncertain about where to position themselves. The camera crew, too, made curious movements, one repositioning equipment seconds before the chaos, another lowering a lens that had a clear line of sight to the stage. Whether coincidence or consequence, these actions shaped the narrative that followed. When examined in slow motion, it's clear that patterns of hesitation and inconsistency began even before the crisis unfolded. For the public, this raised an unsettling question. If those trained to protect and document were unsure how to respond, what chance did anyone else have? In investigations that followed, experts pointed to the breakdown of communication as a key failure, one that transformed order into disorder in the span of moments. One individual in particular has drawn sustained scrutiny due to his body language and positioning before the incident. Standing near the front of the guardrail, his demeanor appeared unusually tense, eyes locked on the stage, posture rigid, and a faint grin caught in still frame seconds before the critical moment. Witnesses later said they remembered that look, not because it was overtly threatening, but because it felt detached from the mood of the room. Analysts who reviewed the footage cautioned against jumping to conclusions, noting that body language can be easily misread, especially under pressure. Yet, what made his presence noteworthy wasn't only his expression, but his timing. Just as the sound echoed through the venue, his movement, small, swift, and deliberate, coincided with the moment everything changed. Again, nothing proves wrongdoing, but in professional environments, timing matters. In the security field, every action is designed with precision, every motion rehearsed. When something deviates from that rhythm, it deserves a closer look. For many who have revisited the footage, the unease doesn't come from what's seen, but from what isn't explained. In the aftermath, analysts presented two primary technical theories to explain how the fatal moment occurred. The first suggests a mechanical failure or misuse of a compact, concealable device, while the second explores the possibility of a malfunctioning audio transmitter. Both scenarios emphasize how easily a small object, something as ordinary as a microphone pack, can become a critical factor in a high-pressure environment. The wireless mic theory, for instance, emerged after a frame-by-frame review of footage showing a burst-like distortion around Charlie Kirk's collar. Some believed it could have been a malfunction, an electrical surge or battery failure that produced the sound and shock wave caught on multiple devices. Experts in event technology explained that although rare, such failures can occur under certain conditions, particularly with overcharged batteries or damaged transmitters. Yet, without the original equipment available for independent testing, neither explanation could be confirmed. What remains certain is that the investigation expanded beyond human behavior to include questions of technology, how it's maintained, tested, and monitored in live event environments. That exploration adds complexity to the case. Not everything suspicious is intentional, but not every malfunction is innocent. Still, the most haunting detail in the timeline may be the 8 seconds of hesitation captured after the first sign of distress. 8 seconds. That's how long it took for trained professionals to react in a situation designed around speed and precision. Analysts later reviewed these moments frame by frame. You can see confusion ripple across the team, one guard looking to another for instruction, the camera crew frozen mid-motion, the crowd turning in unison toward the stage. In that short window, communication broke down completely. There were no visible hand signals, no audible commands, no organized movement toward the injured party. In security terms, those 8 seconds represent not just delay, but paralysis. It wasn't fear alone that caused it, it was uncertainty. Every second of inaction deepened the chaos. What makes this detail even more striking is that security teams undergo continuous drills for exactly this type of emergency. They're trained to prioritize movement, communication, and cover. That such a pause occurred in a professional environment raises serious procedural questions. Investigators later noted that hesitation is often the product of unclear hierarchy. When no single voice takes command, every voice waits for someone else to lead. And in those moments, safety dissolves. Further examination revealed that multiple entry points to the venue were not fully secured that evening. Certain access doors remained unlocked for logistical reasons, and a rooftop section, later determined to be a potential observation point, was not properly cleared during pre-event sweeps. Such oversights are not uncommon in large-scale operations where security responsibility is shared among private contractors, event organizers, and local authorities. But this case demonstrated how even minor lapses can create catastrophic outcomes. Coordination between different teams appeared to have faltered. Each assumed the other had verified those checkpoints. Experts call this fragmented accountability, when responsibility is spread so thinly that no one feels directly answerable. The result is invisible vulnerability, the kind that hides in routine checklists and unspoken assumptions. The tragedy underscored a painful truth. Security isn't only about guards and gates. It's about coordination, attention, and constant communication. The gaps in coverage that night didn't just expose a venue, they exposed a system too comfortable with shared assumptions. Even more concerning was what happened to the footage itself. In an environment lined with cameras, on stage, backstage, and throughout the parking areas, several feeds cut out minutes before the fatal moment. Others froze, while some returned as static-filled frames. The result, missing visual records during the most crucial window of time. Technical teams cited possible power interruptions or data transmission errors, both plausible explanations in complex setups. But what unsettled observers was that no detailed technical report was ever made public. For investigators, the absence of that footage was a major setback. Without it, timelines became fragmented and speculation grew louder. Analysts refer to this as operational blindness, a situation where those tasked with monitoring lose their visual grasp on unfolding events. Whether by fault or accident, the silence of the cameras deepened the mystery. Footage has one job: to preserve truth. When it fails, even unintentionally, trust falters. Transparency is what bridges that gap, yet official statements addressing the missing recordings were limited to brief acknowledgments with little elaboration. That silence became the story within the story. The immediate aftermath was marked by a flood of carefully worded press releases, formal, polished, and notably restrained. There were expressions of sympathy and commitments to cooperate, but few specifics about what had gone wrong. For families, witnesses, and the public, that restraint felt hollow. Transparency is often described as a virtue, but in moments of crisis, it becomes a necessity. Without it, uncertainty thrives. People begin to interpret silence as avoidance, and every unanswered question becomes a breeding ground for doubt. The tragedy at that event wasn't just a loss of life, it was a loss of trust. Institutions tasked with ensuring safety seemed hesitant to speak openly about the breakdowns that occurred under their supervision. Perhaps they were waiting for formal investigations to conclude, or perhaps they were navigating legal constraints. But perception can be as powerful as truth. Each passing day, without clarity, hardened public skepticism. The choice to stay silent, even for procedural reasons, created a vacuum that no statement could later fill. Across social media, the discussion spread like wildfire, fast, fragmented, and charged with emotion. In the hours after the tragedy, grief gave way to inquiry. Hashtags filled the timelines, threads multiplied, and videos dissected every frame of available footage. What began as mourning quickly evolved into a collective search for meaning. People weren't just reacting, they were investigating. They wanted to understand how such an event could unfold under what was supposed to be flawless protection. They wanted to know how, in a place surrounded by cameras, guards, and trained professionals, disaster had slipped silently through the cracks. The tone of the public conversation was not one of vengeance, but of accountability. It wasn't about assigning blame to a single person, it was about confronting the possibility that something deeply systemic had gone wrong. Accountability, for most, did not mean punishment. It meant reassurance, proof that the lessons from this tragedy would be learned, that policies would evolve, and that the next time someone entrusted their life to a system, that system would not falter. As the story spread, the conversation grew larger than the event itself. What started as a question about one venue in Utah became part of a broader national dialogue. People began asking how security systems are managed and monitored at large-scale events across the country, concerts, rallies, conventions, and political gatherings. How prepared are those in charge of protection? How often are safety drills conducted? How effectively do communication chains function when seconds decide lives? The questions became painfully practical. Could better communication protocols have saved a life that night? Could real-time footage backup systems have prevented the loss of critical evidence? Could anyone, have acted sooner if they had clear instructions or less confusion on the radio channel? These weren't theoretical debates about policy. They were urgent, human questions born out of shock, disbelief, and the haunting sense that a catastrophe could have been prevented. As more information trickled out, it became clear that the incident was not an isolated failure. It was a mirror reflecting the systemic vulnerabilities beneath layers of bureaucracy and complacency. It revealed how easily coordination can falter when too many departments operate in silos, how fragile response systems become when human instinct is replaced by over-reliance on protocols, and how the absence of communication can be as deadly as the act itself. Because in moments like this, people don't expect perfection. They expect presence. Presence in the form of quick action, clear leadership, and human responsiveness, the kind of awareness that transcends manuals and training drills. And presence, painfully, was exactly what was missing. As days turned into weeks, analysts and commentators began piecing together a pattern. The tragedy revealed that failure in protection is rarely the result of a single catastrophic mistake. It is more often the outcome of many small, almost invisible missteps. A missed inspection.
A malfunctioning camera.
A delayed message. An overlooked signal. A moment's hesitation that allowed confusion to fill the air. None of these, by themselves, would have been fatal. But when they align, when complacency meets coincidence, the results can be devastating. The story, in truth, isn't just about one night or one person. It's about what happens when communication breaks down, when accountability becomes diffused, and when everyone assumes someone else is in control. In that kind of vacuum, response time slows, responsibility blurs, and tragedy finds its opening. Every individual wearing a badge, holding a walkie-talkie, or standing behind a camera that night carried a responsibility larger than their job title. Their role wasn't just to record, to observe, or to guard. It was to act decisively in the critical moment when hesitation can cost a life. Yet when those moments came, too many froze. And when they did, the consequences rippled outward, past the walls of the venue, into the public consciousness, and through every conversation about trust, safety, and leadership. Experts now describe such collapses as institutional drift, the gradual erosion of vigilance that occurs when systems begin trusting procedures more than people. It's the slow fading of urgency, when routine replaces purpose. It happens quietly over years until one day, the system built to prevent failure becomes the very thing that enables it. Drills are checked off, reports filed, forms signed, but the core mission, to stay alert and human in moments of crisis, slips away unnoticed. Institutional drift is dangerous because it disguises itself as efficiency. On paper, everything looks fine. Equipment is maintained, staff are trained, protocols are followed. But behind that polished facade lies fatigue, complacency, and the illusion of control. And when the moment of truth arrives, it becomes clear that while the system looks perfect, its people have stopped believing their actions matter. In the aftermath, investigators began dissecting every second of the timeline. What was said on the radios? Who noticed what and when? Why were some cameras inactive? Each revelation deepened the public's unease. Because the closer you looked, the clearer it became that the failure wasn't random, it was cumulative. It was the sum of overlooked details, unasked questions, and unspoken assumptions. As the months passed, official reports were compiled.
Committees met.
Policies were revised. Statements were issued. But while documents accumulated and procedures changed, the emotional residue remained heavy for those who were there. For the staff who froze, the witnesses who screamed, and the family who waited for answers, time didn't heal. It only clarified how deeply the silence had cut. 8 seconds. That's how long it took from the moment confusion set in to the moment irreversible loss occurred. 8 seconds that would echo endlessly in the memories of those present. It wasn't just the sound that haunted them. It was the silence that followed. Silence in the room. Silence in the reports. Silence from the very people expected to provide clarity. Every new regulation written in response now serves as both prevention and reminder. Prevention, because it aims to ensure such chaos never happens again. Reminder, because each line of policy acknowledges that it already did, and that it shouldn't have. True accountability doesn't begin in courtrooms or press briefings. It begins in honesty, the courage to say something went wrong, to admit that the systems built to protect can fail, and to commit sincerely to doing better. That is the first and hardest step toward restoring public faith after a breach this deep. Because this story was never about blame. It was, and still is, about responsibility, the kind that defines integrity in public service, media transparency, and institutional duty. The lesson extends far beyond the tragedy itself. It's a reflection on every system that promises safety: schools, hospitals, transport hubs, and stadiums. In all these spaces, protection depends not just on technology or policy, but on the human beings behind them, their attentiveness, empathy, and courage to act even when unsure. Safety, after all, is not a slogan. It's not a checklist, a form to sign, or a phrase to print on uniforms. Safety is an unbroken chain of awareness and communication, of people watching out for one another with genuine care. When one link in that chain fails, the whole structure trembles. And when the structure trembles, trust collapses with it. That collapse of trust was perhaps the greatest casualty of all. After the event, even as officials assured the public that new measures were being implemented, many found it hard to believe. Words felt too polished, apologies too scripted. The community didn't want promises, they wanted presence. They wanted to see leadership standing shoulder to shoulder with them, not hiding behind statements. They wanted to feel that lessons weren't just written on paper, but engraved into practice. In the months that followed, a small but determined group of independent journalists, former security experts, and civic advocates kept the discussion alive. They revisited timelines, cross-checked testimonies, and raised questions in public forums. Their persistence wasn't driven by politics or fame. It was driven by the conviction that transparency must never depend on convenience. Their work mattered because collective memory fades quickly. Public outrage has an expiration date, but institutional reform takes time. Without sustained attention, the systems that failed risk sliding back into comfort. That's why these investigators, despite fatigue and backlash, kept digging. Their reports, interviews, and quiet persistence became the moral spine of the story, a reminder that truth doesn't disappear simply because it becomes uncomfortable. For the families, the pursuit of truth became a personal journey. Many of them spoke privately about how grief evolved into purpose. They attended hearings, reviewed statements, and refused to let the silence stand unchallenged. In their words, it wasn't about reopening wounds, it was about ensuring those wounds meant something. Each unanswered question represented not just a failure of information, but a failure of respect. Because to lose someone without understanding how or why is to lose them twice, once in body and once in truth. Over time, new safety standards emerged across venues nationwide. Real-time data backup systems were installed. Chain of command protocols were restructured to prevent message delays. Staff were retrained, not only in emergency tactics, but in situational awareness and psychological readiness. These changes didn't undo what happened, but they transformed grief into action. And in that transformation lies a glimmer of hope that even from the worst kind of silence, progress can still speak. Still, for those who experienced it firsthand, the memory remains vivid. Every loud noise triggers a flashback. Every security briefing feels personal. Every improvement feels like a reminder of what could have been. The echo of that night continues, not because it hides answers, but because it demands we keep asking the right questions. In the end, this tragedy stands as both a warning and a call to conscience. It warns that systems, no matter how advanced, are only as strong as the people who run them. It calls us to remember that safety is not something granted. It is something practiced every day, in every decision. It reminds us that silence, when it replaces truth, is not neutrality, it's negligence. So, as the story continues to unfold through updates, inquiries, and reform efforts, the real measure of accountability will not be found in punishment, but in presence. In the willingness to face hard truths, to stay transparent even when uncomfortable, and to treat every human life as sacred enough to warrant full attention. Because when tragedy strikes, what the world remembers most isn't the moment of impact, it's how we respond afterward. And in this case, the silence that followed remains the loudest sound of all. It echoes not through headlines or courtrooms, but through the conscience of every institution that promises to protect. Stay informed, stay aware, and don't forget to subscribe for continuing updates as we pursue the truth, not with noise, but with clarity and care. Because the pursuit of truth, like protection itself, must never fall silent.